Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back through the swirling steam of history, not into some epic battle or earth-shaking treaty, but into something far more dangerous for your sleep schedule: the Ottoman Empire's baffling, beautiful obsession with tulip-shaped teacups. Picture this. The year is 1712. The sun has dipped below the horizon in Istanbul, and the city exhales an amber candlelight. Cobblestones glisten from the day's rain, and somewhere behind carved lattice windows, a servant carefully pours piping hot tea into a glass so delicate you swear it might evaporate. It flares at the top, narrows in the middle like a tulip poised mid-bloom. Someone lifts it slowly, sips, smiles. You're watching a ritual that's as ordinary as yawning, yet laced with centuries of silent drama. And yes, you probably won't survive this without getting at least a little sleepy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander slowly into the heart of old Istanbul, where the scent of roasted chickpeas and coal smoke lingers in the air. The city may be asleep, but inside the aging wooden homes, life trickles quietly onward. A child coughs. A cat shrinks into the shadows. And in the corner of one modest room, a teacup clinks gently against a copper tray. No one speaks. They don't need to. You notice something strange: the glass is shaped oddly. Not like the teacups, you know. It's tallish, flared at the lip, cinched dramatically in the middle, and smooth all the way down to its tiny base. You lean closer. The glass glows faintly with warmth. It holds not much more than a shot of tea, yet it looks dignified, like it belongs on a pedestal. And here's the kicker: it's everywhere. Every home, every tea stand, every huddled group of old men playing backgammon in half-lit alleyways. This tulip shape isn't a trend, it's law, or at least it feels that way. Why? That's what you've come here to figure out. You step over a sleeping dog and follow the smell of steeped leaves through winding alleys to a crumbling courtyard filled with stone benches and low trees. An old man pours himself tea under a fig tree, nods at you, then promptly dozes off mid-sip. His cup balances perfectly in his hand, like it was meant to nap with him. Historians still argue whether this design was engineered for function or fetish, but let's rewind things before the glass even existed. Long before the Ottomans had glass teacups, they had a deep, mystical relationship with tulips. Yes, actual flowers. The Ottoman court worshipped them, commissioned entire paintings and poems for them. People held midnight garden parties where the petals were lit by hundreds of flickering oil lamps. You can practically hear the awkward lute music and the nervous laughter of diplomats, wondering how seriously to take a flower. But tonight you're focused on something simpler: how tea entered this fragrant scene. See, tea wasn't native to the Ottoman lands. It crept in slowly like a stowaway. First from China, bundled in paper and mystery, then through Persia, and finally via merchants on dusty trade routes who valued it as a medicinal tonic more than a recreational drink. The earliest Ottoman references to tea are laced with suspicion. Was it a cure? A poison? A new kind of opium for the brain? For centuries, coffee held the throne. Coffee was loud. It stained your teeth, got you talking politics. Tea was demure, the kind of drink you had alone while staring at raindrops sliding down a window. But somewhere, somehow, in the 17th century, a quiet change began. The Ottomans started sipping more tea. Not boiling it in mugs like the Brits, but infusing it gently in kettles. No milk, just leaf water and thyme. The vessels mattered. Porcelain was too precious. Ceramic too clunky. And then came glass. Thin, see-through, and heartbreakingly fragile glass became a symbol of refinement. You could see the deep amber color of the tea before even tasting it. You couldn't hide poor quality leaves in glass. It was honest, unforgiving, and therefore very Ottoman. You trail behind a porter carrying a tray with 6 identical glasses, clinking quietly as he moves. It's almost hypnotic. Each glass catches the light in a soft golden flare. These aren't random shapes. There's intention in every curve. The tulip design does more than just look nice. It keeps the tea hot at the base while allowing the rim to cool slightly, making it easier to sip without singing your taste buds. Or at least that's what the believers say. But there's more to it. Quirky detail time: some early Ottoman tea servers believed that drinking from the wrong shape of glass could mess with your temperament. Angular cups were said to promote restlessness. The tulip with its gentle flair was calming. Medicinal even. Whether you believe that or not, it gives new meaning to the phrase, drink in peace. You finally settle on a bench as a sleepy waiter places a steaming cup in front of you. You lift it. It's light as air, warmth trickles through your fingers. You sip, and for a moment the noise of the world fades. It's just you, the cup, and the soft hum of a city built on layered traditions. That's how the obsession begins, not with a bang, but a whisper of steam and the faintest tremble of glass on porcelain. You're still holding the glass. The tea's gone lukewarm now, but the shape of the cup, slender in the middle, flared at the rim, rests perfectly between your thumb and forefinger. It feels oddly personal, like it was designed with only you in mind. But this comfort didn't arrive here by accident. To understand the tulip-shaped teacup, you've got to follow the leaves. Long before the Ottomans fell in love with tea, they were already in love with trade. And no trade route was more magical or more overhyped in dusty sixth-grade textbooks than the Silk Road. But beneath all the silk and spices was something far leafier tea. It begins in the east. You picture weathered hands plucking delicate leaves in the misty mountains of southern China centuries before a single Ottoman sipped a drop. Tea was a sacred art form in Tang dynasty courts, a philosophical act in Japanese temples, and a bribable commodity in Central Asian markets. Somewhere in all that sipping and swapping, the leaves found their way west. Now imagine this, you're a spice merchant from Bursa, 14th century. Your donkey smells weird. Your bags are full of cinnamon cloves and something new. Dried leaves. They look like crushed laurel and smell faintly like mossy citrus. You've heard a Persian say it's brewed like medicine and keeps the brain alert. Sounds like a good thing to serve your boss. Historians still argue whether tea arrived in the Ottoman realm via diplomatic gift merchant caravan or mystical Sufi. What they do agree on is that the Ottomans were suspicious at first. The empire loved coffee, the loud, black, bold kind. Tea was seen as the shy cousin who reads poetry in the corner. The first proper mentions of tea in Ottoman records trickle in during the 16th century, and they're almost clinical. Think medical treatises, not cafe menus. It's described as good for digestion, good for melancholy, and excellent for balancing the bile. Sounds delicious. You walk through an old herbalist shop where dried rose petals and lemon balm still hang from the rafters. Somewhere in the back, in a crooked wooden drawer labeled CI, you find a handful of old tea leaves. Crumbly. Smelling faintly of rain and paper. This isn't your average grocery store brew, it's a foreign thing. Exotic, slightly mystical, probably mispronounced a dozen ways. But by the 17th century, tea had started to inch its way into Ottoman daily life, especially among scholars, clerics, and people who really needed to stay up reading old Arabic commentaries at 2 a.m. Still, it wasn't brewed how you'd expect. No sugar, no two-bag overkill. They'd place the leaves in a small pot, pour hot water over it, and wait. Slowly, patiently. You didn't just drink tea. You sat with it, watched it change color, smelled it before each sip. It was meditation in liquid form. Quirky fact. Break-early Ottoman tea drinkers sometimes added a bit of dried plum or a splash of rose water, not for sweetness, but for humoral harmony. Because what's the point of tea if your phlegm is unbalanced, right? Over time, the drink left the shadows of the apothecaries and found its way into homes. But here's where things get spicy. Not literally spicy, that's section 5, but socially spicy. As tea crept into the daily rhythm of Ottoman life, people started getting opinionated about it. What kind of leaves? What color should it be? How long should it steep? Enter the tea purists, the Kaisalar, who treated the act of brewing like alchemy. They argued that real tea should be deep amber, not brown. That it should bite your tongue ever so slightly, not lull it. And they began favoring glass over ceramic, not just because it was lighter, but because you could see the truth of your brew. That's when the shape war began. At first, glass cups were simple, cylindrical, straight-walled, slightly boring. Functional, not fabulous. But then came the flourish, the birth of the tulip shape. Why? Because, of course, this empire would find a way to combine its love for botany optics and hot leaf juice. Tulips had long been a symbol of Ottoman elegance, beloved by poets, sultans, and gardeners with too much time on their hands. But blending that shape into a drinking vessel? Now that was genius. A glass that looks like a tulip not only echoes the empire's aesthetic, but also serves a purpose. The narrow waist keeps the tea warm. The flared lip cools the top for sipping, and it just feels right in your hand. You walk through a bazaar watching vendors line up rows of these glasses like trophies. No two are identical. Some are smoky gray. Others catch the light with a faint green tint like sunlit pond water. You pick one up and see yourself reflected warped, sleepy, vaguely historic. Even among the glassmakers, debates flared. Should the waist be narrower? Should the lip flare wider? Should there be a subtle twist in the glass? Historians still argue whether the final canonical shape was decided by artisans the palace or just popular demand from cranky tea grannies. Whatever the answer, the result was a glass that became inseparable from Ottoman identity. It wasn't just a cup, it was a signal. Of taste, of class, of an empire learning to slow down and sip, not gulp. And that's the shift you feel most keenly tonight. You're not here to study timelines or treaties, you're here to watch a civilization fall in love with a habit. To see an empire known for conquest and architecture cradle something so quiet, so warm, and so breakable. As the last tea stand closes for the night and the city dims to a dull orange glow, you find yourself craving another sip not for the caffeine, but for the ritual. The slowness, the feeling of history gently curling into your fingers. And that tulip-shaped cup it waits for you still warm. The cup warms your fingertips again. You lift it slowly, letting the steam graze your upper lip before taking a careful sip. The taste is sharp but mellow, and the glass rests like it belongs in your hand. That shape, it's more than elegant. It's familiar. You've seen it before, not just in tea stalls and sleepy cafes, but in art and textiles and in the very structure of the empire's gardens. Because before there were tulip-shaped teacups, there were tulips everywhere. Tonight you wander through the whispering remnants of those imperial gardens where the air still smells of damp soil and overgrown beauty. The Ottomans didn't just grow tulips, they revered them, celebrated them, obsessed over them like your friend who still talks about their high school crush. And you start to understand the tulip-shaped teacup didn't just emerge from utility or whimsy. It bloomed from a national love affair. Back in the 16th and 17th centuries when the empire was flexing its might across 3 continents, something quieter was happening behind palace walls. Tulips, those pointy-petaled swan-necked flowers native to Central Asia, were being cultivated with the kind of intensity usually reserved for royal heirs or celebrity chefs. The Ottomans bred them, cataloged them, painted them, and penned poetry about their curves. The sultans, especially Sultan Ahmed III, didn't just sponsor tulip gardens, they ruled from them. He was known to host twilight garden parties under glowing lanterns where dignitaries strolled among thousands of tulips arranged by color, scent, and petal pattern. You imagine yourself walking there now past topiary peacocks and waxy petals glistening with dew. Somewhere a reed flute plays, a nightingale sings a little too loudly, and a cup of tea, tulip-shaped of course, is handed to you on a silver tray. Historians still argue whether this obsession was a calculated show of imperial elegance, or just a sign that the Sultan was bored stiff. Either way, the period earned its own name, the Tulip Era, or Lale Devri. And oh, it was weird. You pass by a painted screen showing a tulip with its own halo, surrounded by gold leaf spirals and tiny scripted poems. Miniature artists didn't just paint flowers, they painted individual types of tulips with lovingly annotated borders. "This one is shy," one caption reads. Another, "fragrant like the soul of a moonlit dream." You try not to laugh, but the devotion wasn't just aesthetic. The tulip became a metaphor for everything. Its pointed petals mirrored the calligraphy of the Quran. Its symmetry represented divine order. And most poetically, its fragile beauty echoed the transient nature of power. Quirky detail time, some high-ranking officials in the tulip era carried tiny tulip bulbs in their robes, not as snacks, but as emergency gifts. Kind of like business cards, except way more biodegradable. Over time, the tulip worked its way into textiles, tiles, turbans, even the architectural designs of fountains and mosques. And from there, it was only a matter of time before it invaded domestic life. Think of it like the ancient version of branding. The shape had cultural momentum, and when the Ottomans finally embraced tea as more than medicine, it made perfect sense to mirror their national flower in the very cup they drank it from. You step into a quiet pavilion filled with faded upholstery and glass display cases. Inside one of them sits a collection of early tulip glasses, each one hand-blown, slightly lopsided, with just a hint of pink in the base. Some are tiny, some almost too tall to drink from comfortably. But they all share that same contour, a base that hugs the heat. A narrow waist you instinctively grip, and a flared lip that invites your mouth like an open flower. You reach out, imagining the fingers that held it before you. Viziers, poets, concubines, maybe a grumpy janissary with a surprising taste for floral design. The glass doesn't just hold tea, it holds centuries of symbolism and the quiet echo of vanished lips. Tulip bulbs once sold for obscene amounts of money. During the height of the tulip craze, you could trade a single rare bulb for a small house in Istanbul. Imagine explaining that to your spouse. No, honey, we don't have a kitchen anymore, but look at the frills on this bloom. Eventually, like all obsessions, it burned too brightly and faded. The tulip era came crashing down in 1730 when a tax revolt spiraled into a full-blown uprising. The flowers were trampled. The parties ended. Sultan Ahmed III was dethroned. Historians still argue whether the revolt was truly about tulips or just an excuse to vent decades of economic frustration. But the symbolism was enough to leave a lasting bruise. And yet the tulip shape endured, not in gardens but in glass. You imagine some heartbroken artisan banned from painting tulips on palace walls, slowly shaping a tea glass that mimicked the curve of a petal? Quiet rebellion in molten sand, a flower you could still cradle even if the garden was gone. The design became a silent monument to an era, a way of keeping beauty alive without saying a word. People sipped from tulip glasses without even realizing they were holding a fragment of imperial nostalgia in their hands. You look down. Your own cup's gone empty again, but you don't move yet. You sit a while longer, the warmth lingering on your fingers like fading sun on marble steps. Somewhere in the distance, a breeze rustles through imagined tulips, and you somewhere between history and dream are already blooming with sleep. You blink slowly, the afterglow of imaginary tulip gardens still warming your eyelids. But now you're slipping into the firelit haze of a workshop somewhere deep in the twisting streets of 17th century Istanbul. The air is thick, hot, gritty, and glassy with anticipation. Welcome to the furnace. This is where the real tulip-shaped magic happens. You step inside and it hits you immediately. The scent of scorched wood, molten sand, and the faintest trace of burnt wool. Probably someone's sock didn't survive the morning shift. Men move like shadows behind wavering heat. Their faces glow red from the oven's mouth, their hands steady despite the danger. This isn't chaos, it's choreography. And tonight you're watching them shape an empire's obsession, one breath at a time. The first thing to know about Ottoman glassblowers: they were equal parts artist-chemist and fire-bending wizard. Known collectively as kam ustalari, or glassmasters, they carried centuries of technique passed through whispered instruction and burnt fingertips. Many were based in Beykoz, just north of central Istanbul, where forests provided fuel and the nearby Bosphorus carried soda ash and minerals like obedient trade winds. Glassblowing in the Ottoman world wasn't an afterthought. It was imperial business. The Topkapi Palace itself issued commissions glass for lamps, for windows, for decorative bottles filled with rosewater or attar. And of course for teacups. Those little flared goblets weren't just thrown together. They were summoned from breath and heat and sweat. Quirky detail break: the best glassblowers were exempt from certain taxes and often left out of military drafts because apparently the empire knew it needed good teacups more than spare soldiers. Priorities. You inch closer to a workbench. A young apprentice rolls a gather of glass onto a hollow iron rod, then swings it gently like a pendulum, letting gravity help. The mass glows orange, a miniature sun, and he begins to blow. Carefully, slowly. The shape grows, narrows, flares. Someone whispers that one's for the Grand Vizier's daughter. No pressure. They shape the glass using wooden molds soaked in water to prevent ignition. Each hiss of steam sounds like the cup is exhaling. Once it holds the basic form, the cup is cut free, reheated, trimmed, and if the artisan's feeling spicy, engraved with tiny flourishes. Some glasses bore swirls, etched lines, or faint wave patterns that shimmered in lamplight, but most remained smooth and simple. Because in Ottoman taste, beauty came from proportion, not glitter. Historians still argue whether the tulip teacup originated in palace workshops or in small urban ateliers that sold to both nobles and nap-deprived scribes. What's agreed upon is this. By the late 17th century, the tulip shape had gone mainstream. The design spread like a warm whisper. It looked refined, it felt good in the hand, and it carried the same aesthetic DNA as the empire itself. Graceful curves with just enough flair to remind you who was in charge. You watch a master lift a cup from the annealing oven where it's been slowly cooling. He holds it to the light, squints, and frowns. Too lopsided. With a sigh, he tosses it into a barrel of broken glass. It shatters softly, joining 100 other almosts. Perfection is the bare minimum around here. And there's danger too, not just from the heat. The glass itself, so thin, so fine, can crack with a look. Some workers even wore linen gloves soaked in vinegar, believing it strengthened their grip and protected against cuts. Whether that's medically sound or just artisan lore, historians still argue. But it makes for a good visual. As you wipe imagined soot from your forehead, you spot a finished set of tulip cups arranged on a shelf. They're cooling in the dim light like precious fruits. One is perfectly clear. Another carries a faint green tint, a remnant of iron oxide in the sand. A third has a ghostly swirl through its center like a fossilized sigh. These aren't factory-made clones. Each one is subtly unique, like fingerprints or heartbreaks. You remember earlier how the shape hugged warmth in its base while letting the top cool for sipping? Turns out that wasn't an accident. These artisans knew their physics. They may not have called it thermodynamics, but they understood the subtle relationship between form and function. A straight-walled cup loses heat too fast. A bowl-shaped one burns your lips. The tulip with its elegant profile is a compromise between art and engineering, and it stacks neatly on silver trays. You leave the workshop now, passing through curtains made of old linen scraps and half-finished blueprints pinned with iron nails. Outside, the evening has cooled, but your cheeks still glow from the oven's memory. Down the alley, you spot a street vendor arranging glassware for sale. Even here outside the firelit world of elite artisans, you see tulip-shaped cups nestled among jars and lanterns. A shape born in fire now carried in the hands of grocers, bakers, and barbers. You realize the same hands that once sculpted imperial chalices now make everyday glasses for the tired and thirsty. The obsession didn't die, it just settled down, grew modest, found a new rhythm in the city's heartbeat. One last quirky image before you move on. In some parts of the city, glassmakers believed that whispering a secret into the molten blob just before shaping it would temper the cup with good fortune. So somewhere out there, someone's sipping from a teacup that literally holds a whispered wish. And maybe tonight, so are you, Dot. You carry your new tulip-shaped glass carefully as if it might shatter from a harsh glance. It's empty now, just a warm echo of the tea it once held, but your fingers still enjoy the fit, like slipping on an old pair of shoes made entirely of elegance. You pause at a stone bench under a fig tree, and for a moment you wonder, why this shape? Why tulips at all? It's time to figure out why sipping from a flower became the norm. So let's break this down. Why the flared lip, the narrow waist, the transparent belly? Was it comfort, aesthetic, heat retention? All of the above. The Ottomans never wrote a formal guidebook on this, of course, because who would take the time to explain the logic behind what feels like common sense? Still, you have theories, and some of them are actually good. First form equals function. No, seriously. That flared rim at the top isn't just for show. When you pour hot tea into the glass, the wider lip allows a thin layer of the surface to cool faster, making it possible to sip even when the lower half is still hot enough to scald your dreams. Think of it as thermal diplomacy negotiating heat between your fingers and your lips. Then there's the middle cinch. That narrow waist acts like a thermal buffer, giving your fingers a spot to hold without conducting the full wrath of boiling liquid. It's ergonomic, stylish, and subtly genius. It's the tea-drinking equivalent of those car cup holders that somehow just fit your weird travel mug. If your teacup were a gown, the waist would be corseted just tight enough to say, I've got taste, but I'm not trying too hard. But even the heat logic doesn't quite explain the national obsession. There's something else at play: symbolism. And in the Ottoman mind, the tulip was more than a flower. It was an emblem of divine order. Its symmetrical petals and bold posture echoed the aesthetics of Islamic art, where geometry and repetition were visual prayers. That symmetry, that curve, it didn't just look nice, it whispered of cosmic balance. Historians still argue whether the tulip glass's final design was inspired directly by floral geometry, or if it was just a happy accident, the natural result of thousands of sips and burns and trial runs in glass workshops. Either way, once the shape arrived, it stuck. There was no going back to clunky mugs or shallow bowls. The people had seen the future, and it looked like a flower. Now the fringe historians, and yes, fringe historians are a thing, have even quirkier theories. Some believe the tulip shape mirrored the ideal human form as described in Ottoman poetry: broad-shouldered, narrow-waisted, and open-hearted. That's right, you might be drinking out of a metaphorical supermodel. Is that ridiculous? Absolutely. But also kind of charming. You wander into a quiet Kai Bachisi a tea garden. Tables are set with classic tulip glasses, each one filled to a different level, some golden amber, some so strong you could use it to clean antique coins. People are sipping slowly, not talking much. Tea here is less beverage, more companion. You overhear a man at the next table quietly explaining to his son that the clarity of the glass shows respect. That if you serve tea in an opaque cup, you might be hiding poor leaves' weak color, or even he gasps. Reboiled water. The child's eyes widen. Clearly, this is serious business. Quirky moment alert in some parts of Anatolia. Old tea etiquette included tapping the glass before sipping, not for superstition, but to wake the tea as if it needed a moment to stretch before diving into your throat. And if someone handed you a glass filled only halfway, that wasn't laziness, it was a sign of affection. A full glass meant stay longer. A half-full one said, I'll refill it while we talk. These tiny signals level of the poor color of the brew, how the glass is handed to you, all played into the larger performance of hospitality. And with tulip glasses, you could see all of it. There was no hiding, no tricking, no mystery. Just clarity, warmth, and trust all in one flower-shaped cylinder. You try pouring some tea into a more modern mug just to compare. It's fine, warm, functional, but the magic's gone. It's like watching a movie on a plane instead of in a theater. You miss the curve, the see-through sides, the delicate pause before the sip. Somehow, the mug doesn't feel like it wants to be held. Then there's the sound. You notice it when a server sets down a tray nearby. The glasses clink gently like wind chimes made of lullabies. The thin glass vibrates with a high sweet tone more delicate than ceramic, less dull than porcelain. It's subtle, but that clink became part of the Ottoman soundscape. You'd hear it in cafes, markets, bathhouses. It was the acoustic signal of comfort. So why the tulip shape? Because it worked. Because it looked good. Because it carried 1,000 invisible meanings in its curves. Because, frankly, it gave your fingers something to do while you waited for your gossiping uncle to finish a long-winded political theory about shepherds and taxes. Even today in modern Turkey, you rarely see any other shape of tea glass. Sure, there are novelty designs for tourists and quirky cafes that serve tea in jars or cups shaped like boots or cats or whatever else Etsy has poisoned us with. But if you walk into a regular home, a government office, or the corner barbershop where men gather just to sit, you'll see the same silhouette. Tulip-shaped, eternal. You finish your tea and place the glass back on its saucer. It settles with a soft clink as if closing a sentence. Around you, the garden begins to thin out. Lights dim. Conversations fade to murmurs. The glass may be empty, but its shape lingers in your hand. Familiar, intentional, like the empire that shaped it curved not just by necessity, but by poetry. The tulip-shaped glass is set down again, and this time it's on a silver tray that glides silently across a polished marble floor. You blink and realize you're no longer in a sleepy garden tea house, you're somewhere deeper. Velvet-draped, mosaic-lit, and perfumed with rosewater. Welcome to the inner sanctum of Ottoman luxury. You've slipped into the seraglio, the palace harem, and here tea is more than a drink. It's a performance. You trail behind a eunuch in soft slippers as he carries the tray through a narrow hall. There's no banging of doors or shouting of names. Everything in this part of the Topkapi Palace is done with practiced elegance, like the slow drip of a fountain or the flight of a heron. And when tea is served here, it must follow a choreography that rivals a ballet. Inside the chamber, the women sit in a semicircle dressed in silks that shimmer like rain on oil. A lute twangs gently in the background. Conversation flows in whispers, laughter muted by layers of embroidery. Then the tea arrives. The glasses are placed one by one, always from the right. Always on the tiniest, most ornamental saucers you've ever seen. Each cup is a jewel, transparent, of course, because here in the seraglio, nothing is hidden, not even the strength of your brew. And the shape? Always tulip. Never not tulip. Why? Because in the Ottoman court, especially within the harem, every gesture, every object was heavy with meaning. The flared top of the glass invited attention. The narrowing center suggested delicacy. The visible tea color hinted at mood status, even intent. It wasn't just what you drank, it was how you drank it. Historians still argue whether these tea rituals were designed by the palace staff or evolved naturally among the women who made the seraglio their world. What's clear is that tea became a key part of feminine diplomacy offered to friends, potential allies, rivals, even spies. Yes, spies. You settle into a cushion nearby, invisible but close, as two women exchange subtle glances over their glasses. One sips, raises a brow, the other smiles slightly, placing her cup down before it's empty. A quiet signal of disinterest or maybe calculated patience. A tulip glass can't hide its contents. There's no deception in amber light. Outside the harem, the court eunuchs and viziers partake in their own tea rituals. But while their cups may be the same, the game is different. In the council chambers, tea is offered before negotiations, not after, because no one trusts decisions made without first sipping something scalding. One quirky tale from the early 18th century tells of a vizier who judged the honesty of an ambassador by how he held his tulip glass. Too tight, and he was considered aggressive. Too loose, and he might be hiding something. Just right, and negotiations could proceed. Basically, it was a real-life tea reading, but not from the leaves from the grip. Back in the harem, the ladies aren't just drinking tea. They're painting tulips on silk fans, embroidering them into cushion covers, braiding their meanings into stories. Tea and tulips blur together in gossip and poetry. The younger girls practice balancing glasses on the backs of their hands, training in elegance and control, not just coordination. And of course, no tea ritual is complete without sweets. Platters of locum pistachio-dusted and rose-scented circle the group. Each glass of tea is meant to enhance the flavors, not drown them in sugar. You nibble a piece in your mind's eye and let the soft starch melt, followed by a hot, strong sip. Heaven. Historic heaven. But it's not all fluff and frills. The harem is a political engine, whether the outside world acknowledges it or not. Women here hold influence over succession, foreign policy, and the sultan himself. Tea is one of their tools, subtle, warm, disarming. And it is served in the exact same glass that the man at the barbershop uses 2 miles away. That's the beauty of the tulip teacup. It doesn't care where you are. In the palace or the slum, it speaks the same visual language. Still, here in the palace, the rules are stricter. No chipped glasses, no uneven pours. Never pour tea into an already half-empty glass. And the server must never touch the rim. That's sacred territory. You watch as one girl, barely more than a child, is corrected gently by an elder after handling her cup too casually. The older woman lifts her own glass and performs the ritual again, gracefully, deliberately pausing just long enough between each motion to imprint meaning. The young girl mimics her, this time slower. A tiny nod follows, approval granted. Quirky moment time, there's a preserved imperial letter in the archives where a sultan requests a particular set of tulip glasses from Damascus, claiming they made his headaches less dramatic. Whether that was placebo or just a spoiled ruler flexing his aesthetic taste, we may never know. As the evening cools, the harem's tea session dissolves into softer murmurs. Some women drift to side rooms, others begin their nightly ablutions. The eunuchs collect the trays, checking each glass for cracks. In this place, a chipped glass isn't just poor hospitality, it's an omen. And the palace runs on symbols. You follow the tray as it leaves the chamber, passing through corridors decorated with tulip motifs, carved into stone, tiled into walls, woven into the carpet. The obsession is absolute. But nowhere is it more tender, more elegant than here, where hands that have never held a sword wield their teacups with strategic poise. You find yourself thinking not just about tea, but about every moment in your life when something small, something fragile held great power, like a whispered rumor, a glance, or a warm tulip-shaped glass resting on a saucer that sounds like a bell. When you set it down, the marble floors of the palace fade beneath your feet, replaced by something crunchier. Dirt, gravel, maybe even the soft, springy turf of a battlefield. That's right, you've left the perfumed inner sanctum of the seraglio and wandered somewhere much less elegant, though no less Ottoman, the military camp. And you're about to learn something. Few people realize those dainty tulip-shaped teacups, they didn't just sit on palace trays or cafe tables. They went to war. You blink under a canvas tent flap as a janissary brushes past you, armor creaking slightly, saber swaying at his hip. His fingers holding a tulip-shaped glass as casually as if he were lounging at a bazaar instead of waiting to storm a fortress. It's hot, dusty, tense, and yet somewhere near the campfire tea is being poured. Now, to be fair, the Ottomans weren't sipping Earl Grey while dodging cannonballs. But tea, especially in the later centuries of the empire, had become a daily necessity for both officers and foot soldiers alike. And yes, it was still served in those same iconic glasses. Delicate, absolutely. But those cups traveled in padded crates alongside maps and gunpowder protected like miniature relics of civility. Historians still argue whether the tulip-shaped glass was a standard military item or something only brought by higher-ranking officers and noble-born commanders. But evidence suggests it wasn't that unusual to see even the grizzled, mud-splattered ranks of Ottoman soldiers sipping scalding tea as they leaned against siege ladders. There's something wonderfully absurd about that image. Men in chainmail faces smeared with ash politely passing around a pot of tea. But it happened. A traveler once described an Ottoman camp in the Balkans as peculiarly refined, noting that the soldiers drank tea with the serenity of old poets while preparing for the bloodiest work. That's a vibe. Why bring glass onto the battlefield, though? Wouldn't metal be safer? Easier, yes, but remember, glass doesn't just hold tea. It holds meaning. A tulip glass, even in the middle of chaos, reminded a soldier of home, of structure, of something fragile worth returning to. In a way, it was psychological armor. You step around a makeshift table where an officer pours tea with the calm of a man who knows battle won't start until the pot is empty. He doesn't rush. The pour is careful, tilted from a long-necked brass kettle. Each glass receives just the right shade of amber. One soldier adds a sugar cube and rolls it around in his cheek as he drinks. Another takes his tea black and hot, wincing with every sip like he needs the pain to stay alert. Quirky detail time, some regiments had unofficial tea masters, guys who weren't technically cooks, but who everyone relied on to keep the brew going. Their job wasn't listed in pay records, but mess halls often operated on their schedule. No tea, no morale. It was that simple. Even the logistics are fascinating. A campaign supply list from the early 1800s includes tea leaves, firewood kettles, and you guessed it, glass cups. Not clay, not pewter. Glass. Somewhere, a quartermaster took one look at a stack of fragile tea glasses and said, "Yes, bring those into a cannon zone." And the design held up surprisingly well. The narrow waist gave it structural integrity, easier to grip, harder to drop. The saucers stacked neatly, and the glass itself, while thin, was often tempered just enough to survive daily handling, unless, of course, someone dropped it during a cavalry charge. But hey, nothing's perfect. You sit beside a smoldering fire where a group of soldiers debate whether the water's too mineral-rich today. They swirl their tea like wine critics. One swears by a splash of lemon peel, the other insists the proper color should be deep rust, not too brown. These men have scars. They've seen horrors. But in this moment, all that matters is temperature, steep time, and clarity. A scholar once wrote that tea in the Ottoman army operated like a sacrament. It wasn't about hydration, it was about rhythm. March, drill, rest tea, attack, retreat tea. The tulip-shaped glass became part of that rhythm, an anchor of repetition that soothed the nerves and steadied the hand. Of course, tea wasn't always welcome. There were commanders who saw it as soft. Where's the coffee? They'd grumble, clutching their thick-walled mugs. But even they eventually gave in. Why? Because the soldiers drank it anyway. Because the glass caught the light just right. Because the sound of a full tray of tulip glasses rattling through camp sounded like civilization refusing to break. Imagine that clink, clink, clink echoing across a muddy field at dawn. Somewhere outside the tent, a bugle moans into the fog. It's almost time to move, but no one's rushing. The last few drops are drained, glasses are wiped gently with linen scraps and packed away. You can feel the tension rise as the fire dies down. But in every soldier's gut, there's the glow of warmth, half from the tea, half from the ritual. And here's a truly poetic image to send you drifting: an Ottoman officer leaning against his horse just before a major siege, holding his glass high to examine the light through the tea. As if he's searching for omens in the amber. As if the future might shimmer just beneath the rim. He takes a sip, sets the glass down on a flat stone, draws his sword, and walks into history with the taste of tulips still on his tongue. The battlefield smoke fades behind you, and now the sound of hooves and marching boots is replaced by the rattle of carts and the murmur of markets. You've wandered back into the city, but this time not into the opulence of palaces or the order of army tents. No, now, you're drifting through the rhythmic clatter of everyday Ottoman life where the tulip-shaped teacup isn't sacred or strategic. It's just normal. Well, sort of. You find yourself in a side street of Istanbul, early 19th century. The sun filters through slatted shutters, catching in the dust and dancing on copper pots. A baker's boy darts past you with a tray of simit on his head and a tulip glass in his hand, somehow not spilling a drop. Magic, or just thousands of years of muscle memory. This is where the tulip glass makes its most impressive leap from courtly obsession to common comfort. Once a symbol of refined taste, it now balances on wooden tables outside barbershops next to repairmen's tools and in the outstretched hands of sleepy ferry workers. It has become democratic. Every class, every district, every time of day. You wake up with it, you argue with it, you propose marriage beside it. Historians still argue whether this mass adoption was encouraged by the state or driven by trade and demand. But whatever the cause, it worked. Tea became the people's drink, and the tulip glass became its uniform. You follow the scent of charcoal toast and jam into a modest tea stand, run by an old man named something like Mehmet or Hassan or Ali. He doesn't ask if you want tea, he just pours. The pot is steaming blackened from years of use. He tilts the kettle slowly, filling your tulip glass exactly 2/3 of the way, not one drop more. Why not fill it up? Because in Ottoman tea culture, that would be rude. Filling a glass to the brim is like screaming, "Go home with your hands." The proper pour just under the flared lip invites conversation, warmth, or refill. It's a small kindness encoded in custom. You sit beside a woman cradling her glass with both hands. Her eyes are closed, her expression soft. She's not in a rush. Because drinking tea in this place in this way is not about speed, it's about being. Quirky practice alert: in some towns, tea was offered first to guests, then to family, then lastly to the server. If someone insisted on reversing that order, it was either a major compliment or a subtle insult. It depended on how warm the glass was. You keep moving. The city pulses with life. Tea trays clatter down cobbled alleys. You watch a vendor balance 6 full glasses in a wire holder, zigzagging through street traffic like a caffeinated ballerina. A blacksmith takes a break between hammer strikes to down his glass in 2 long sips. At the port, dockworkers grip their tea like anchors, warming their hands before plunging them back into cold water. The tulip shape is so deeply embedded in their routine, you wonder if anyone even sees it anymore, like wallpaper or gravity. But then you stumble across something different, a dervish lodge. The air is thick with incense and chants echo faintly through the stone arches. Inside, whirling figures spin in slow, deliberate circles. The tea here is gentler, lighter, often infused with herbs. Mint, lemon balm, sometimes even sage. The tulip glasses are there too, but their curves seem to echo the turning bodies, delicate arcs against the motionless hush. In Sufi circles, tea wasn't just refreshment. It was a bridge between the physical and the divine. The act of holding something warm, transparent, and alive with color mirrored spiritual awakening. The tulip cup became part of that ritual, a minor vessel for major meaning. One elderly dervish tells a story of how a particularly potent cup of tea once sent a mystic into an hour-long trance during which he claimed to have received poetry from a tulip that spoke in Arabic. You nod politely. You don't question it. You've had some intense herbal blends yourself. Historians, by the way, still debate whether this story is poetic exaggeration or actual hallucination caused by suspicious ingredients. Either way, it's fabulous. You step back into the broader city, and it's here you begin to see the pattern. The same glass appears in wildly different settings: elegant salons with mother-of-pearl tables, grimy mechanic shops with oil-slicked rags, the quiet corners of mosques where elders sit in thoughtful silence. The tulip cup adapts. It survives. It doesn't demand status. It absorbs it. It's even used in matchmaking. In many households, when a young man's family visits a potential bride's home, she prepares and serves tea in tulip glasses. It's a test wrapped in etiquette. How hot is the tea? How full is the glass? Did she add sugar or let them do it themselves? Every move is scrutinized like a courtroom deposition disguised as hospitality. And let's not forget the backgammon corners. You walk past a shaded cafe where old men with eyebrows like storm clouds are locked in fierce, slow-motion battles. Every 5 minutes, a waiter appears, replaces half-empty glasses with fresh ones, and vanishes. The men barely nod. But the ritual, sacred. One of them beckons you closer, not to play, but to offer a sip. His tea is darker than yours, nearly opaque. You take a sip and nearly sneeze from its bitterness. He grins and says something like, "Strong tea, strong words." You suspect he says this often. In the distance, the muezzin's call rises soft and resonant. People pause. The tea continues. That's the real trick of the tulip glass. It weaves into the rhythm of the day. It punctuates moments without interrupting them. It becomes a kind of metronome for daily life. And as you sip your final drop from your newest cup, you realize that this glass, the same shape once reserved for royalty, is now the heartbeat of the ordinary dot. You stir the last few drops of tea at the bottom of your glass, watching them swirl like lazy galaxies in amber. The saucer beneath it is chipped the edge of the glass slightly cloudy. It's not perfect, but that's exactly why it matters, because somewhere along the way, this tulip-shaped teacup stopped being just a drinking vessel and started becoming an artifact. A memory trapped in curved glass. You wander now into a quieter part of the city. The sounds of the marketplace fade behind you, replaced by the hush of heavy doors and careful footsteps. You're entering the world of collectors, scholars, curators, the ones who don't just drink from teacups. They preserve them. Here, the tulip glass is behind velvet ropes lit by angled lamps in dustless rooms. In a modest museum just off a cobbled side street, you find a whole display case filled with antique glasses, some clear, some smoked, some flecked with gold around the rim like tiny crowns. Each has its own placard, its own origin story. This one made in Beykoz, 1824, with manganese-tinted glass. That one commissioned by a provincial governor who reportedly sipped tea before signing every death warrant. Yikes! Historians still argue whether these early glasses were made with purely aesthetic goals, or if their distinctive shape was a byproduct of local tooling limitations. Some say the flared top was easier to form with Ottoman-era molds. Others insist it was intentional, modeled after calligraphic brushstrokes or flower vases from Persian miniatures. You step closer to the glass. It magnifies your reflection, warping your features ever so slightly. You imagine the thousands of lips that once pressed to those rims, statesmen, poets, bakers, revolutionaries. The ghosts of tea drinkers past. But here's the twist. The moment that tulip glass made its way into museums, it stopped evolving. It became fixed in time. Frozen. The exact opposite of what it was meant to be. Because a tulip glass isn't designed to be admired, it's meant to be held, touched, washed, dropped and glued back together again. You step into a nearby antique shop where the vibe is distinctly less reverent. Teacups sit on rickety shelves beside mismatched saucers and tarnished sugar tongs. The owner, a chain-smoking man who calls you my friend 3 times before even saying hello, insists he has a royal teacup somewhere in the back. You don't buy it, but you do buy a slightly lopsided glass with a faint purple tinge, probably dyed by sunlight and bad storage. He tells you it's from the early Tanzimat period, which may or may not be true. What is true is that as the Ottoman Empire began reforming in the 19th century, even its tea habits started to shift. Western influence crept in. New factories opened. Glass became easier to produce, cheaper to sell, and harder to trace. But for all its growing accessibility, the tulip shape remained stubborn. No matter how many cheaper molds entered the market, no one dared change the basic silhouette. The empire itself could bend, crumble, even collapse, but that curve, that sacred sippable arc, untouchable. Quirky fact moment: during the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, an Ottoman pavilion served tea to curious Americans in, yes, tulip-shaped glasses. Some visitors tried to smuggle them home, mistaking them for exotic shot glasses. Others thought they were candle holders. One woman reportedly used hers to store sewing needles. Somewhere in Kansas, a tulip glass may still be hiding in a dusty drawer, dreaming of bergamot. Back in the present, well present-ish, you follow the rise of teacup portraiture. That's right. In the late Ottoman period, painters began depicting tea scenes not just for realism, but for symbolism. A still life featuring tulip glasses wasn't just about thirst. It was about class, leisure, domestic harmony. The presence of a slightly fuller glass near a seated man might hint at hospitality. A half-empty one beside an empty chair, longing, absence, or maybe just bad service. You visit the home of a late Ottoman poet whose diaries are now public record. In one margin, he sketches a crude tulip glass and writes, "She held it with the tips of her fingers, afraid, or maybe just polite." It's a throwaway line, but it tells you more than any government document ever could. Because the tulip glass didn't just hold tea, it held moments. And once people realized that, they started saving them, hoarding them, wrapping them in newspaper and stashing them in cupboards for guests, even if the guests never came. You peek into the life of a provincial family in the 1910s. Their best tulip glasses are used once a year on Eid, when relatives visit from far away and the house smells like cardamom and nervous laughter. The glasses clink softly on brass trays passed between cousins who barely know each other. And in that sound, a connection is forged. But let's not forget the accidental collectors, the ones who never meant to preserve anything. In villages across Anatolia, people kept old tulip glasses simply because they still worked. A chip here, a clouded base there, it didn't matter. These weren't antiques, they were survivors, functional fossils of a drinking tradition too deeply rooted to change. Historians still debate what defines an original tulip glass. Is it the curve, the size, the era, the handmade imperfections? Or just the fact that someone used it, loved it, maybe broke it, maybe didn't? As you sip from your own secondhand find, you realize something. The tulip-shaped glass doesn't become valuable because it's old. It becomes old because it was always valuable. You set your cup down next to the museum display. One pristine untouched, the other faintly chipped half full of tea and memory. Only one of them feels alive. Your fingertips still warm from the last sip. You drift now, through a quiet Ottoman parlor, trailing your fingers along embroidered cushions and polished wood. It smells faintly of cardamom dust and something sweeter, maybe rosewater, or maybe just memory. Two tulip-shaped glasses sit on a table between an elderly woman and a young man deep in conversation. You pause, sensing something different in the way their fingers wrap around the glass, the way they tilt their heads, sip, and respond. This isn't just tea, it's a subtle game of roles. Because now you've stumbled into one of the most intricate aspects of the tulip glass's legacy, how gender shaped and was shaped by the ritual of tea. You take a step back watching. In Ottoman society, where public and private life were carefully partitioned, tea somehow danced freely across boundaries, and yet the way men and women used their teacups were how and with whom said more about their position in society than any decree. In the public sphere, especially among men, the tulip-shaped glass was a symbol of rhythm and routine. Picture a group of men at a coffee house or a karathani, smoking, playing backgammon, and sipping glass after glass of strong black tea. For them, tea was more than refreshment. It was punctuation, a pause between arguments, a buffer in negotiations, a tool to avoid silences that grew too long. It was about control, pace, even dominance. Some historians suggest that among Ottoman men, how you handled your tea glass could imply everything from your social standing to your emotional state. A slow swirl of the wrist signaled deep thought. A quick sip followed by eye contact meant you were ready to speak. And of course, leaving your glass untouched, that meant you were either plotting something or about to storm out. Probably both. Now shift to the women's side of the curtain. In home salons and the inner circles of the harem, tea rituals were gentler but no less powerful. Women served tea with grace, but they weren't just pouring hot water into a glass. They were sending messages. Offering a guest tea first was a mark of honor. Delaying it subtly could indicate disapproval. A particularly strong or bitter brew might mean the hostess wasn't thrilled about a visitor's presence even if she smiled politely the whole time. Historians still argue whether these unspoken codes were consciously passed down or emerged naturally from a culture built on layered etiquette. Either way, the tulip glass became a kind of dialogue tool, particularly in female social spaces. And then there was matchmaking. Ah yes, the grand tea test. In Ottoman tradition, and still in some corners of modern Turkey, the moment when a bride-to-be serves tea to a potential groom and his family is legendary. You float now into one such living room. Nervous glances, over-polished furniture, a kettle that's been boiling for hours. The young woman enters holding a tray of tulip-shaped glasses. Here's where things get theatrical. The tea might be sweetened just right, or deliberately salted. Why? Because this is the test. If the groom drinks the salty tea without flinching, it's a sign of patience and respect. If he makes a face, uh-oh. One girl famously used lemon and hot pepper in the mix. She wanted out of the proposal. She got it. You step closer, watching the woman place the glasses down with a slightly trembling hand. Everyone in the room pretends not to stare, but the tulip glass becomes the center of the universe for 10 exquisite seconds. Will he drink? Will he smile? Will he ask for another? Quirky tradition alert: in some villages, the way the saucer was placed beneath the glass was said to predict the gender of future children. Balanced perfectly. A boy, a slight tilt. A girl, 2 saucers stacked beneath one glass. Twins, though, you suspect someone just ran out of clean dishes. But the ritual doesn't end at courtship. The tulip glass follows people through life after childbirth. It's part of the celebratory tray brought to the mother. After funerals, it's what guests sip in hushed tones while remembering the deceased. In sickness, it's delivered with lemon and honey. In heartbreak, it's bitter and silent. The glass becomes a kind of emotional barometer. You pass now through a row of homes peeking in as everyday life unfolds. In one house, a woman teaches her daughter to brew tea, scolding her gently for using too much sugar. In another, a father stirs his glass with a silver spoon, listening to his son's stories from school. Even children have learned the art of gripping the glass just so, thumb and forefinger on the waist pinky trailing lightly for balance. And yet for all its ubiquity, the tulip glass didn't erase gender divisions, it mirrored them. In public, men controlled the narrative. Their tea was strong, fast, sometimes gulped in the middle of a debate. At home, women orchestrated the choreography. Their tea was delicate, often sweeter and tied to emotion. Each sip carried subtext. Historians point out that while both men and women drank from the same shape, their relationship with the glass diverged like two poems written in the same meter but different voices. You walk into a final room, quiet, lined with shelves. A collection of old photographs. In almost every one, someone holds a tulip-shaped glass. A woman with sharp cheekbones smiles behind hers at a family picnic. A man in a fez raises his during a political meeting. A young boy in school uniform mimics his father's grip. The glass connects them all, yet speaks differently to each. A shape that invites unity while allowing space for nuance. A mirror that doesn't judge but reflects what you bring to it. You take your own glass now. Sip once more and wonder what message you would have sent if someone had been watching. You rest your tulip-shaped glass on the saucer with a gentle clink and glance sideways almost instinctively as if someone might be judging your pour. But there's no one there, just the memory of every argument ever whispered across a table set with tea. Or coffee. Because now you step into the great Ottoman debate, tea versus coffee, the warm war that never quite ended. And no, this isn't your average cafe menu decision. This was a cultural rivalry, a beverage-based identity crisis. A scalding, slow-brewing feud that lasted centuries and divided homes, cities, and hearts. It all starts with coffee, of course. The Ottomans met coffee long before tea. Brought up from Yemen in the 16th century, coffee exploded into the empire like a caffeinated revolution. Istanbul's first coffee houses opened in the 1550s, and they weren't just places to grab a drink. They were social batteries, intellectual hubs, and low-key gossip chambers. Men gathered to discuss politics, poetry, taxes, horse prices, and what Mustafa did at the hammam last week. It was a whole vibe, so you can imagine the scandal when tea began creeping into this territory. Quietly at first, like a second cousin moving into your guest room just for a little while. And then suddenly everywhere. By the 18th and 19th centuries, tea had firmly planted itself as a real contender, not just among the elites, but among artisans, traders, and ordinary folks. It was easier to grow domestically, easier to prepare, and frankly, less likely to cause heated philosophical debates that ended in someone getting asked to leave the table. Still, coffee lovers didn't go quietly. You pass a dim coffeehouse now, its wooden sign faded by decades of smoke. Inside, old men hunch over tesfes, those long-handled pots used to brew coffee until it froths like a gossiping neighbor. The air is thick, aromatic, bitter, defiant. One man catches your eye and raises his cup in mock salute as if to say, "We were here first." Historians still argue whether tea displaced coffee or simply joined it. Most agree that it wasn't a clean takeover, more like a prolonged custody battle where both parents stayed in the same house and tried not to spill anything. And the tulip glass. That's where things get spicy because you couldn't serve coffee in it, not properly. Ottoman coffee demanded porcelain or brass, small, thick cups called fincan, designed to hold dense, muddy brew and keep it piping hot. Try pouring Turkish coffee into a tulip glass and you'd be laughed straight into exile. It's just not done. So in a way, the tulip glass itself became an unspoken declaration. This is a tea space. No arguments, no cardamom-scented detours. You see a tray of tulip glasses coming toward you, and you know exactly what you're about to be served. There's comfort in that kind of clarity. Quirky moment break. In late Ottoman Istanbul, it wasn't uncommon for certain neighborhoods to be unofficially known as tea districts or coffee zones. Entire street corners were loyal to one drink or the other. The more bookish parts of the city leaned tea. The more theatrical, dramatic quarters, definitely coffee. It was like a caffeinated turf war, minus the switchblades. And yet, despite their differences, both drinks were shaped by ritual, by presentation, by the act of serving. That's where the real competition took root. Coffee had the elaborate pot, the thick foam, the fortune-telling from leftover grounds. But tea had the elegance of glass, the color, the slow pour, the transparency of intention. You enter a home where both drinks are being served tea and the salon coffee in the study. The woman in charge glides between rooms like a cultural diplomat, adjusting sugar levels and making sure no one feels inferior. You sense the careful balance, the silent code: one drink for warmth, the other for wit. Tea comforts, coffee challenges. In modern terms, you could say tea was the Instagram aesthetic, all soft lighting and warmth. Coffee was Twitter sharp, fast, unforgiving. If tea said, "Let's talk," coffee said, "Convince me." But the tulip glass began winning hearts for reasons beyond flavor. It offered pace. With its small size, it encouraged multiple rounds. One cup was never enough. You were always invited to stay. Even the act of declining another glass required a ritual, placing the spoon across the rim to signal, "No thank you." In contrast, coffee. One cup, dense, final. You sit now at a three-legged table beside two friends locked in a light argument. One sips tea, swirling the glass. The other cradles a tiny fincan of coffee. Their debate isn't about politics. It's about which drink best suits a broken heart. Tea, one insists, is gentler, forgiving, soft on the nerves. Coffee, the other argues, is for resilience, for waking up and moving on. You sip your tea and nod along. Both are right, and both are completely wrong. That's the magic. And yet, the tulip glass edges forward. As the 20th century neared, industrialization and domestic tea cultivation gave tea the logistical edge. Coffee became a little more expensive, a little less convenient. Cafes adapted, homes changed their shelves. The tulip-shaped glass became as common as the salt shaker, but not without resistance. Some coffee loyalists sniffed at tea like it was a pale imitation, a lady's drink, a trend for the idle. One aging poet famously dismissed tea as hot sadness in a slipper. He later recanted after drinking 6 glasses on a winter morning and admitting it felt like being hugged by a quilt woven by your grandmother's ghost. Historians like to point out that cultural transitions rarely happen cleanly. But if ever there was a soft conquest, it was this one. The tulip glass won not by replacing the coffee cup, but by changing what a pause could feel like. You stand now at the edge of a hill watching the Bosphorus shimmer below. A tea vendor sets up a small stand, his tray filled with identical tulip glasses steaming in the wind. Just behind him, another man pours coffee into heavy cups from a chesve nestled in hot sand. No one argues anymore. The rivalry softened. The battlefield became a picnic. You smile, sip your tea, and silently thank the glass that never asked you to choose, only to stay a little longer. You wander now into a space that feels both absurd and delicate, like a dream stitched with silk and economic ruin. It's not a garden, not exactly, but it's full of flowers. Or at least drawings of them. On fabric, on tiles, painted onto serving trays, embroidered into collars. Everywhere you look, tulips. Welcome to Tulip Mania, Ottoman style, a time when love for a flower spiraled wildly out of control, dragging teacups right along with it. This isn't just a footnote in history, it's a full-blown cultural fever dream. Imagine living in a world where tulips were more than flowers. They were status, wealth, aesthetic identity. They were currency, poetry, architecture. And if you couldn't grow them, you could still sip from one, or rather from a glass shaped like one. You settle into a low divan in an 18th century salon, the walls washed in pastel frescoes, all glowing in oil lamplight. Around you, not a single surface lacks tulips. The windows are rimmed with stylized tulip motifs. The host's caftan features a symmetrical scrolling pattern of them. Even the sugar bowl is shaped like a blooming bud. And right there in the center of the room, of course, is the tea tray glittering with tulip-shaped glasses. These aren't your modest functional glasses from the neighborhood cafe. These are ornamental, finely blown, some with gold edging, others tinted faintly in rose or amethyst. They don't just hold tea, they flaunt it. They declare that someone somewhere paid entirely too much for decorative glassware and is very proud of it. Historians still argue whether tulip mania in the Ottoman Empire directly mirrored the infamous Dutch version, where a single bulb could be traded for the price of a house, but the cultural temperature was certainly similar. During the early 18th century, especially under Sultan Ahmed III, tulips became a national aesthetic obsession. But where the Dutch bubble was all speculation and spreadsheets, the Ottoman version leaned theatrical. Tulip festivals were held at night, illuminated by lanterns made of dyed paper. Poets composed verses comparing tulips to the prophet's beauty. Miniaturists painted infinite rows of identical tulips to showcase divine order. One courtier famously commissioned tulips to be planted in a swirling spiral that could only be seen from a balcony because who doesn't love exclusive horticultural art? And naturally, the obsession leaked into the tea world. The tulip-shaped teacup, already a well-liked vessel, suddenly became a full-blown fashion statement. You move through a pavilion where glassmakers are showing off their latest creations. Some glasses have 6 flared points to mimic actual petals. Others are fluted and ribbed. One has a tiny gold calligraphic prayer etched at the base, only visible after finishing the last drop. The idea that even your tea drinking should end in contemplation, or maybe in bragging rights. Quirky collector alert. One noble family had a set of 40 tulip glasses, each representing a different tulip species in shape and tint. They were never used, only displayed. Probably dusted once a week by an underpaid servant who was told, "Careful, that one's worth more than your cousin's dowry." But the tulip craze also had a class problem. As the elite reveled in gardens, glasses, and poetic gatherings, the empire's working class watched from the margins, squinting at all this ornamental extravagance while struggling to afford basic food staples. This disconnect didn't go unnoticed. You're sitting now in a tea house far from the palace where glassware is simpler and the tulip pattern is scratched in by hand, if at all. Here, the obsession looks more like indulgence. The tea still tastes good. The conversations still hum. But someone in the corner is muttering about rising prices, about taxes, about the Sultan's recent garden party that involved fireworks, 50 peacocks, and reportedly a tulip-shaped water fountain that sprayed rose water on command. This tension simmers unspoken until it boils over in 1730. A man named Patrona Halil, part butcher, part troublemaker, leads a revolt against Sultan Ahmed III. The reasons are complex, but the tulip becomes the symbol of his critique. The era's extravagance, its indulgent aestheticism, its dizzy love of the unnecessary, all folded neatly into one vulnerable flower. The gardens are trampled, the palace is raided. Glasses one assumes are smashed. Tulips fall out of favor almost overnight, reduced from icons of beauty to emblems of arrogance. Historians still argue how widespread the anti-tulip sentiment really was, whether the average citizen truly hated the flower or just hated what it represented. But one thing's certain, the golden age of tulip fever was over. And yet, the tulip-shaped teacup didn't disappear. You'd think it would have been rejected alongside its petaled cousin, but no. It survived, adapted, simplified. The fanciest glasses were quietly boxed away, but their silhouette remained on cafe tables and kitchen counters. Why? Because while tulip bulbs were hoarded and flaunted, tulip-shaped glasses were used. They weren't locked in a glass cabinet. They were passed hand to hand, washed, refilled. They carried not just style, but utility. Even after the backlash, people didn't want to let go of the shape. It had become too familiar, too intertwined with the act of taking a break, of pausing life's chaos with one small, beautiful sip. You find yourself in a small shop years later where the glasses are plainer now. No gold rims, no exotic colors. Just smooth, clear glass. But the curve is still there. Maybe a little less dramatic. Maybe more functional, but still recognizably tulip. A quiet rebellion. A reminder that beauty doesn't have to be loud. The empire moves on. The economy shifts. Politics change. But the tulip-shaped teacup remains no longer a symbol of excess, but of comfort. Memory, simplicity, and silhouette. You take another sip, imagining petals curling softly around your tea. Not extravagant, not fragile, just right. You're still in that small shop, the one filled with plain glass tulip cups lined up like quiet soldiers. They catch the light on a nearby shelf, but something in the way they sit, stiff, symmetrical, precise, feels formal, official. You blink. That's because it is official. Now you're stepping into a far less cozy part of this story. Tonight, the tulip-shaped glass leaves parlors and gardens and makes its way into the dusty world of Ottoman bureaucracy, where it somehow manages to become a subject of law. Yes, you heard right. Tea, glass, law. You trail behind a bureaucrat now, somewhere in the mid-19th century, as he tiptoes across creaky floorboards in an administrative building that smells like ink, wool, and anxiety. He's carrying a tray of tulip glasses, every single one filled exactly to the same point, each saucer spaced with unnatural precision. Because here how you serve tea isn't just a matter of etiquette, it's a matter of protocol. You peek into the council chamber where a group of pashas and clerks sit, their faces drawn, their fingers twitching toward their glasses. A servant sets the tray down. The glasses are identical, the color of the tea uniform. The distance from the rim to the surface of the liquid may be 3 centimeters, maybe 3.2. Someone actually measured. Historians still argue whether formal tea-serving regulations ever made it into codified imperial law. But what's clear is that by the 19th century, the etiquette surrounding tulip glasses had calcified into something almost judicial. There were unwritten rules, and breaking them, especially in government buildings, was like wearing pajamas to a Senate hearing. There were expectations about clarity. Cloudy tea suggested laziness. Expectations about warmth. Lukewarm tea was borderline disrespectful. One 1864 complaint letter from a provincial governor to the Sublime Porte actually includes a paragraph lamenting the unacceptably pale and hastily prepared tea served during a meeting with foreign delegates. That's right, diplomatic incident by way of weak tea. You follow the paper trail now into the heart of imperial bureaucracy. The Tanzimat era is in full swing, bringing reform after reform. Civil codes, military structures, postal networks, and tea. And here's the quirky part. There was allegedly a running joke among Ottoman scribes that you could judge a minister's entire personality by how he held his tulip glass. Upright, steady grip, rigid thinker. Loose, almost floppy grip. Too philosophical. 2 fingers on the base. Pretentious, cradled in the palm. Definitely someone with a poetry manuscript in their drawer. It's ridiculous and somehow completely believable. Even palace ceremonies evolved to include very specific tea rituals. There were moments where the tray should arrive, the order in which glasses were offered. The hand used to serve them always right. The direction of the trays spin clockwise unless you were left-handed, in which case, just try not to spill. Some elite circles even debated the optimal height from which tea should be poured into a tulip glass. High enough to create bubbles, but not so high that the tea cools too quickly. You imagine servants training with weighted kettles pouring again and again, like calligraphy students perfecting their first letter. One written account from a visiting French observer noted that the Turks measured tea not only in glass, but in timing temperature and temperament. He later confessed he'd never been so nervous to sip anything in his life. And then there were edicts, real ones. During late Ottoman modernization efforts, government-run tea houses began popping up to encourage civilized conversation among citizens. These state-monitored venues had guidelines, some written, some enforced by a grumpy man in a vest. Things like no shouting, no cards after dark, and no breaking the glasses. Tulip-shaped only, standard issue. If you brought your own mug, you were kindly escorted out and mocked behind your back. In some regions, tea service was so formalized that officials could be fined for serving tea in chipped or mismatched glasses. One bureaucrat in Trabzon was briefly suspended for a string of hospitality failures, including overfilled tulip glasses and unpolished saucers. His defense. The wind was strong that day. Quirky moment alert, there's an old anecdote of a civil servant who lost an entire promotion opportunity because he served overly sweet tea to a superior known for hating sugar. Whether it's myth or tragicomedy, no one's sure. But the lesson: know your glass, know your guest, or know the consequences. But perhaps the most fascinating piece of all this isn't the red tape, it's the cultural resilience. Even as the empire introduced European administrative models, even as railroads and typewriters modernized communication, the tulip-shaped glass stayed. Not just allowed, but expected. It was the one thing nobody tried to change. Why? Because in the middle of 100 reforms, it was a symbol of continuity. You could replace the architecture, you could redraw the legal code, but don't you dare replace the glass. You leave the ministry offices now and pass into a courtroom. There's no trial today, just a bored clerk sipping from a tulip glass on the judge's bench. The defendant's chair sits empty. The silence is thick with a faint floral aroma, and somehow even here the glass says everything's still in order. The empire's crumbling around the edges, borders are shifting, powers are weakening, but that shape, that flared lip and cinched waist remains defiantly intact. You head back into the street where a low-ranking official offers you a glass from his windowsill. It's simple, utilitarian, clear. No gold, no frills. But it's filled to the exact level you now recognize as regulation standard. You smile and sip knowing full well you're in compliance. The echo of polished boots and paper-stiff regulations fades behind you as you step out of the Ottoman bureaucratic maze and into something altogether more unpredictable foreign soil. You're in Europe now, where the empire's tea culture and, more specifically, its delicate tulip-shaped glassware began to take on a curious second life. You don't have to walk far before you see it. A salon in Paris, perhaps filled with curious aristocrats reclining on fainting couches. They aren't quite sure what they're drinking. The tea tastes different, earthier, lighter, and it's being poured from a sinuous brass pot into a glass unlike any they've seen before. Thin, flared, petite, no handle. Quelle, surprise. Someone whispers, "Is it a vase?" Someone else murmurs, "I think it's a lamp cover." You smile softly because you know what it is, a tulip-shaped teacup. And right now, it's doing something remarkable. It's exporting Ottoman identity through sheer design alone. Historians still argue whether these early exports were part of a deliberate cultural push or just a side effect of trade routes. Either way, by the mid-19th century, Europe was awash in Ottoman aesthetics. Rugs, tiles, hookahs, and increasingly tea paraphernalia. Europeans were fascinated by the Orient, a vague and problematic term they applied to anything east of Vienna. And in their effort to imitate it, they developed an appetite for the empire's quirks, especially its glassware. You step into a Vienna antique market. Among porcelain sugar bowls and brass candle holders, you spot them tulip glasses. Not quite the same, slightly thicker, oddly tinted, their curves too exaggerated or too subtle, but clearly modeled on the Ottoman original. Imitation may be flattery, but in this case, it's also very awkward. A well-meaning English lady picks one up and proclaims it the perfect size for sherry. You're not mad, just gently amused. Some foreign manufacturers began mass-producing what they called Turkish tea glasses, offering them in gift sets labeled Authentic Eastern Charm. Glasses were bundled with teapots that bore no resemblance to actual Ottoman kettles and sold alongside completely inaccurate instructions for Turkish tea that involved adding milk. You sigh audibly. Quirky tidbit. One 1880s London etiquette book described tulip glasses as small vessels best used for exotic liquors or floral cordials. The author, bless their heart, had clearly never visited Istanbul, but amid all the misfires, something real was happening. The tulip-shaped, gentle, purposeful, unmistakable was sticking. Slowly, in salons and drawing rooms, it became a symbol of exotic sophistication. Not every European home served tea in them, but those who did were making a subtle declaration: I travel. I know things. I once heard a lute. You cross now to Paris, where Art Nouveau is sweeping the scene. Curves are everywhere on balustrades, lampposts, perfume bottles, and right there in the back of a department store display a familiar silhouette. A tulip glass repurposed as a votive holder, still flared, still elegant, still whispering of sips taken across marble balconies. Meanwhile, actual Ottoman diplomats were offering tea in tulip glasses during embassy receptions. You peek into a reception room in Berlin where a Turkish ambassador serves dark amber tea to stiff-jacketed Prussian officials. Their faces say we are very serious men, but their eyebrows twitch at the glass in their hands. No handle scandalous. Still they drink, and afterward they nod. Politely, even appreciatively. That's the thing. The tulip glass didn't need to shout. It just had to exist. Its shape carried history, ritual, and elegance without ever opening its mouth. It made Ottoman hospitality tangible, something you could touch, lift, sip. Some museums in Europe began collecting them. Others didn't know what they had. One Dutch museum labeled a tulip glass slender spice jar, possibly Moroccan. An Italian collector placed one upside down and used it as a bell jar for preserving lavender. You can't win them all. Back in Istanbul, the glassmakers took notice. Some even began crafting slightly larger, more European versions for export, heavier, more symmetrical, less fragile. These were shipped abroad by the crate tucked between tapestries and rosewater bottles. And occasionally they made their way to grand homes in Brussels, Madrid, even New York. Quirky export twist: a set of tulip glasses gifted to Queen Victoria was later returned with a polite note explaining that the vessels are too warm to handle. Rumor says one butler suffered mild embarrassment, and at least 2 glasses were quietly misplaced behind a curtain. One eventually surfaced, being used to store sewing pins. You enter a British tea house now where high-backed chairs and thick porcelain cups dominate the scene. But in a corner, a small table where 2 people sip from tulip glasses. Are they Turkish, maybe? Or maybe just in the know? The tea is stronger than the surrounding blends, the conversation quieter, more deliberate. You can almost hear the glass humming with memory. And here's the curious thing: even when it was misunderstood, the tulip glass never felt out of place. It belonged somehow, because its appeal wasn't just cultural, it was universal. It's small, beautiful, practical. It asks for presence. You can't gulp from it. You have to sip. By the early 20th century, knockoff tulip glasses could be found in cafes from Algiers to Marseille. Sometimes they held tea, sometimes liqueur, sometimes just flowers, but their shape was unmistakable. And while Europe tried to imitate the elegance, it could never quite capture the feel, the balance, the poetry. A tulip glass outside the Ottoman world looked like a costume worn just slightly wrong, beautiful, yes, but lacking the subtle choreography of thousands of hands over hundreds of years. You sip now from a cup made abroad, heavy, well-meaning, charming, but not quite right. Then you return to the real thing, lighter, clearer, simpler. It fits your hand like an old friend. The empire may be fading, but its silhouette is spreading. Quietly, gently, like steam from a perfectly brewed pot curling its way across the world. Dot. The foreign salons fade into the background, now their imitation tulip glasses stacked carefully on display shelves or tucked into dusty curio cabinets. You step back onto Ottoman soil, though it's not quite the same empire you remember. The world is shifting. Industry hums like a distant storm, and the glass in your hand feels a little heavier than it used to. Welcome to the twilight of the obsession, the slow, smoky descent of the Ottoman Empire where the tulip-shaped teacup still hangs on. But only just. You walk through the streets of late 19th century Istanbul, where tram tracks glint in the sun and advertisements for imported biscuits compete with Arabic calligraphy on crumbling walls. Everything's in flux. The Tanzimat reforms are giving way to something colder, more mechanical. The empire is modernizing, or at least trying to, and not everyone is thrilled. Factories are cropping up. Glass is being pressed by machines not blown by masters. The results efficient, cheaper, identical, but somehow hollow. You step into one of these factories now, it smells like oil and coal, not sandalwood and ash. The workers move in rigid lines watching dials turning levers. The tulip glasses being stamped out here are perfectly uniform, yes, but there's no breath in them. No slight wobble at the base, no swirl frozen mid-blow, just silent glass birthed from metal molds and conveyor belts. Historians still argue whether this shift to industrial glassware was a tragic loss or an inevitable evolution. Some say it democratized beauty, made the iconic tulip shape available to everyone. Others mourn the death of nuance, the loss of human touch. Either way, it's clear the empire that once breathed artistry into every glass is now too tired to whisper. And yet, the tulip shape persists. You walk through a cafe where the glassware is clearly factory-made, but the ritual remains intact. A young man pours tea into each cup with care, not because he's trained, but because he's watched his grandfather do it 100 times. The curve of the glass still tells his fingers where to hold it, still tells the steam where to rise. Quirky detail break during this period, some Ottoman households began using metal spoon rests shaped like tiny tulips designed to perch next to the glass. Their popularity lasted about 6 months before being deemed unnecessary clutter. But you have to admire the commitment. You visit a wealthy merchant's home, someone who's embraced modernity with flair. There are clocks from Germany, wallpaper from France, rugs from Persia. But in the sitting room, a silver tray, and on it a full set of tulip glasses still warm from a recent pour. Even as everything else updates, the glass remains unchanged. Why? Because while everything else in the empire can shift politics' fashion language, the tulip glass feels permanent. A comfort. A stable detail in a crumbling picture frame. But cracks are showing even in the ritual. In busier parts of the city, tea is being served faster, poured sloppier, refilled with less ceremony. Glasses are chipped more often, and no one bothers replacing them. The saucers don't always match. The spoons are plastic. A quiet erosion so slow you might not even notice unless you're paying attention. And tonight you are. You stroll down toward the docks where foreign ships unload crates of goods and sometimes ideas. Tea is still being served on every corner, but now the cups share space with imported mugs, patterned porcelain, and even shutter thick-walled ceramic tea bowls. Practical, yes, but the tulip glass watches from its shelf, narrowing its waist in disapproval. You overhear a heated conversation between two older men about whether the tea tastes the same anymore. It's the water, one insists. It's the leaves, says another. But you know the truth. It's the glass. The new ones are heavier, duller. They don't hum when they clink. There's a sadness in the air, not dramatic, but quiet. Like a table left unset. Like a final drop of tea growing cold in its cup. And then, the empire ends. You don't see it all at once. There's no grand explosion, just a slow unraveling. Treaties, battles, borders redrawn, flags replaced. But even as the Ottoman Empire collapses, one odd little thing refuses to die: the tulip-shaped glass. You watch as officials flee their post. Armies retreat, maps change colors, but the people, they're still pouring tea, still cradling glass, still tapping their spoons against the rim when conversation lulls. The empire may vanish from textbooks, but in kitchens and cafes it lingers right there in the shape of a teacup. One final quirky note from the edge of collapse: an Ottoman bureaucrat fired during the empire's last months reportedly packed only two things when leaving his office: a photo of his father and his favorite tulip glass. He drank from it every morning for the rest of his life. You step out into a city no longer Ottoman, but not yet modern. Somewhere in between. It's raining. Tea steam coils upward from a street vendor's cart. The glasses are plain now, but the shape is still unmistakable. You sip, and for a moment you feel it. The echo of an empire, not in marble palaces or military parades, but in this tiny curved vessel, still warm in your hand dot. The empire is gone folded into dust and borders, but you're still here. And so is the glass. You wake now in modern-day Turkey, somewhere between tradition and touchscreen. The call to prayer still echoes through stone alleys, but it's followed by the buzz of scooters and the ping of WhatsApp. The skyline is pierced by both minarets and hotel towers. And yet on every corner, at every cafe table, in every office break room, the tulip-shaped teacup endures. You sit at a metal cafe table under a red awning that says Kaishi Hussein in fading letters. It's 2025, but it could be 1975 or 1875. The sound of tea being poured into tulip glasses is eternal. A soft clink, a hiss, the tinkle of a sugar cube swirling like a tiny meteorite. You blink, and a young waiter with wireless earbuds sets down your glass with the same practiced grace of a palace eunuch from 200 years ago. Because the obsession didn't vanish, it just shifted. In today's Turkey, the tulip glass is as common as keys or coins. It doesn't matter if you're in a grocery store queue, a barber shop, or a government building. Somebody will offer you tea, and it will be served in that same familiar vessel. You see them on plastic trays in airport lounges at tractor repair shops in the countryside. Their shape has become a national constant, but now it's almost invisible, so ordinary it hides in plain sight. Historians still argue whether the glass's modern ubiquity has diluted its symbolism or preserved it. Some say it's just a habit now, a cultural autopilot. Others insist it carries more meaning than ever simply by enduring. You follow a delivery driver into a mechanic's garage. Grease coats everything. The radio is loud. Someone's playing cards in the back. And right there on the workbench beside a cracked engine block sits a row of tea glasses. Their waist smudged with fingerprints, their amber contents swirling in the fan breeze. One of the mechanics sees you looking and grins. Fresh one, he asks. You nod. Of course. Quirky tech-era moment. Many cafes now have QR codes taped to the table for menu orders, but the tulip glass remains analog. You can order it digitally, but it arrives exactly the same way it always has. No cardboard sleeve, no logo, no change. In fact, the glass has become one of the few unchanged things in the daily churn of modern Turkish life. There are ads for digital banks painted on streetcars, but the hand holding the phone, still grasping a tulip-shaped teacup. Trendy cafes with exposed brick and Edison bulbs serve kombucha, but also tea in traditional glass. Even the sleekest co-working space will bring your K in the exact glass your great-grandfather once used to argue about land tax. It's not nostalgia, it's muscle memory. You wander now into a tourist bazaar where things get slightly weird. The tulip glass has been reimagined in every form. Tiny magnets, keychains, shot glasses mislabeled as authentic Turkish teacups. You wince. One shop even sells them as candle holders with glitter resin bottoms. You back away slowly, but just outside the tourist lane, an old tea house sits unchanged. Real tulip glasses gleam on tarnished silver trays. Inside, 4 men sit at a low table playing oki. The clink of tiles, the clatter of teaspoons. One man has tea stains on his mustache older than most of the neighborhood. You listen to them talk about politics, football, the weather, their grandkids. Each sentence is punctuated with a sip. Each sip with a soft exhale. You've heard this rhythm before. In the palace, on the battlefield, at the garden party. Now it's just Tuesday. And here's the strangest twist of all in a world obsessed with newness. Speed and reinvention, the tulip glass is one of the few objects that no one really wants to change. They've tried, of course. Some cafes tried taller versions, handle versions, double-walled heat-proof machine washable stackable. But the people, they returned to the old one, the classic, the curve that feels like home. Quirky protest detail in 2017, a popular cafe chain in Istanbul tried switching to Scandinavian-style ceramic cups. Within a month, regulars revolted. A viral tweet read, "If I wanted coffee culture, I'd move to Berlin. Give me my Kai Bardagi back." The glass returned, the ceramic cups were boxed up and forgotten. Even in international pop culture, the tulip glass pops up. Turkish TV dramas often feature emotional showdowns staged entirely over tea. A slow sip, a dramatic glance, someone slamming their glass on the table for effect. It's theater with glassware. And yet outside the screen, the shape remains humble. No one praises it. No one writes love songs to it anymore. But it's always there, on desks, on train tables, in lonely night shifts and crowded weddings. You walk now into a university library. Students sip tea from their thermoses, but the librarian's still pouring into tulip glasses. You spot one on a windowsill, catching the light like a tiny lens. It makes the whole room glow faintly amber. Historians like to say that material culture reflects values, that what we make and keep tells us who we are. If that's true, then the tulip glass tells you this: we hold beauty every day. We don't shout about it, we just sip. You cradle one now, simple, scratched warm. And as the Wi-Fi hums around you and the city pulses with electric urgency, this glass reminds you to pause. Not everything has to change. You're still holding that glass, maybe the 5th or 6th today. Maybe your 100th in this dreamlike journey. And as the last sip slides over your tongue, something softens inside you. You're not just tasting tea anymore. You're tasting history. Familiar, worn, and still somehow golden. The streets are darker now, quieter. The cafes have closed their shutters. The clatter of backgammon pieces has faded to memory, and even the fairy horns seem to hum a little lower across the Bosphorus. And still, the tulip-shaped glass lingers, not just in your hand, but in your thoughts, in the shadows, in the rhythm of the city at sleep. Because here in this final stretch, you don't need another battle law or revolution. You need only to notice the quiet legacy this humble shape has left behind, woven deep into the fabric of life and still blooming in the minds of a million sleepy sippers. You pass through an antique shop still open past reason, its window glowing with warm amber light, inside old prayer beads. Dusty lamps, a dented samovar, and among it all dozens of tulip glasses stacked high, mismatched and wobbling slightly like they're waiting for you. Some have lipstick stains, others are chipped. One is impossibly thin, the kind of glass that wobbles if you breathe too hard near it. You touch it carefully, it feels alive. There's a reason the shape persists. It isn't just tradition. It's muscle memory embedded in generations of fingers. It's comfort disguised as elegance. It's the only shape in the world that tells you this moment matters, but not too much. Sit down, drink, breathe. Historians still argue whether the glass was ever intended to last this long. Whether it was meant to be iconic or simply convenient. Whether its symbolism grew from empire or despite it. But maybe it doesn't matter, because the people decided. And the people kept it. You walk now through a quiet alley in Kadıköy past the glowing shell of an all-night tea house. The last patron sits alone staring into the swirl of his half-drunk glass like it contains a secret. Maybe it does. Quirky detail for your dreams: there are people, real breathing people who swear they can tell the quality of a conversation just by the stains left behind in a tulip glass. A clear ring near the waist. Casual and shallow, a gradual fade from top to bottom. Long, rich, satisfying talk. 3 distinct T-lines stacked like sediment. A wild emotional roller coaster. No lines at all. Somebody drank too fast and left too early. You step inside, order one last glass. The tea arrives hotter than expected. You don't flinch, you wait. You've learned how to sip like the Ottomans did. Slow, deliberate, respectful. Every detail in this vessel reminds you this isn't fast food. It's a ceremony. And now finally you walk home. Each light you pass flickers softly. Each window glows with memory. And somewhere just around the corner, someone is lifting their own glass. Maybe the same shape, maybe even the same moment, and they're part of this legacy too. You find your way to your room, set the glass on the nightstand. Empty now, but somehow still radiant. The kind of object that holds silence like water, that echoes even after it's still. And in this final breath, you understand the tulip-shaped teacup isn't just a relic, it's a language. And whether you're a sultan, or a shopkeeper, a soldier, or a student, it speaks gently in your hands. So now, as your eyes begin to drift and your thoughts float like steam from a midnight kettle, let this last image linger, a single tulip-shaped glass sitting by a window catching the first breath of a morning light. The city is still asleep, the streets are soft, the silence hums like a lullaby. There's no rush here, no urgency, just the memory of warmth of hands wrapped around glass, of lips meeting the rim again and again, like a ritual you didn't realize you were performing. And even now, as you lie here, the shape still fits perfectly in your palm. Imagined or not, it's yours. Feel the curve of the narrow waist that invites your fingers, the flared lip that cools your thoughts, the balance of heat and breath and time. You're not in a museum. You're not studying, you're simply being. Being present, being soft, being still. The world can wait. Let it. Tonight is about quiet obsessions, about objects that outlive empires, about finding peace in small things, things like a teacup curved like a flower, whispering sleep into your bones. And when you wake tomorrow, maybe you'll hold your cup just a little differently, a little slower, a little closer. Not because you have to, but because now you know. The shape matters. Sweet dreams.